With Week 7 in the books, we're set to break down another exciting week of football. Welcome to American Baller, where we focus on all things NFL. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for future videos. There were some crazy upsets, huge performances, reunions, fights, and we're gonna tackle it all. Thursday Night Football, Denver Broncos vs. New Orleans Saints. Starting off the week on Thursday Night Football, the Denver Broncos traveled to the Caesars Sports Superdome to take on the New Orleans Saints. With Derek Carr still sidelined with an oblique injury, it was clear that the Saints missed him. With Spencer Rattler under center against a very talented Broncos defense, New Orleans was never really able to get anything going. The game started off strong in Denver's favor with a pair of field goals by Will Lutz along with an 8-yard touchdown run to give the Broncos a 13-0 lead midway through the second quarter. Just under 2 minutes left in the first half, New Orleans was able to get on the board with the field goal of their own. However, Denver responded with the 52-yarder from Will Lutz with just 16 seconds left in the half. Lutz and Williams kept carrying Denver's offense in the second half, scoring all 10 points for the Broncos in the third quarter. Heading into the fourth, Denver held a dominant 26-3 lead. Things went from bad to worse for the Saints as Rattler was forced into a fumble on a sack. Cody Barton returned it for a touchdown, giving Denver a 33-3 lead. With under 2 minutes left in the game, Jake Haener was able to get the Saints their first touchdown of the game after finding Cedric Wilson for a 12-yard touchdown. Denver came out on top by a final score of 33-10. This was not a strong performance from either quarterback, and offensively, Javonte Williams stole the show with 88 yards and a pair of touchdowns on the ground. The Broncos defense was able to once again come up huge and play a huge role in getting the team another win, improving their record to 4-3, while the Saints now sit at 2-5. Sunday Football, New England Patriots vs. Jacksonville Jaguars. Next up, we go to Wembley Stadium in London where the Jacksonville Jaguars took on the New England Patriots. With how many home games Jacksonville has played in London over the years, this has become their home away from home in a way, and they gave their fans a show. However, it took a bit before Jags fans got what they came for. The Patriots came out of the gates hot with a 16-yard touchdown pass from Drake May to JaMycal Hasty. This went on to be the only score of the first quarter. They then opened the second quarter with a 41-yard field goal. However, Jacksonville finally woke up and went on a crazy tear. They scored 25 unanswered points in an extremely balanced attack. Trevor Lawrence found Brian Thomas on a 6-yard touchdown pass, then Tank Bigsby found the end zone on a 1-yard rush. Just 2 minutes later, Parker Washington returned a punt 96 yards to the house before Lawrence found Thomas again, this time on a 2-point conversion. Heading into halftime, Jacksonville held a 22-10 lead. The only score of the third quarter came on a Cam Little field goal. The Patriots offense was finally able to get some points on the board on a 22-yard touchdown pass from May to KJ Osborne. However, with just under 2 minutes left in the game, Bigsby found the end zone for the second time, this time from 4 yards out. When the final second ticked off the clock, the Jags came out on top 32-16. The rookie under center Drake May had a solid performance for the Pats, throwing for 276 yards and a pair of touchdowns, while Bigsby put the Jets' offense on his back, rushing for 118 and a couple of touchdowns. This game won't go on to play much of a difference in the playoff race, with Jacksonville now sitting at 2-5 and the Patriots at 1-6. Detroit Lions vs. Minnesota Vikings. Now we'll jump to the 1 o'clock slate of games, starting off with the Detroit Lions taking on the Minnesota Vikings. This was a highly anticipated matchup between two of the top teams in the NFC, and both sides did not disappoint. It appeared that the Vikings were going to have another cakewalk to a victory, scoring the first 10 points of the game on a 34-yard touchdown run by Aaron Jones and a field goal by Will Reichert. However, the Lions showed up in the second quarter and went on a tear of their own. They got things started with a 45-yard touchdown run by Jahmyr Gibbs for their first points of the game. Just minutes later, Jared Goff found Amon-Ra St. Brown for a 35-yard touchdown. With just 26 seconds left in the half, Gibbs found the end zone for the second time in the quarter, this time from 8 yards out. Heading into the locker room, Detroit held a 21-10 lead. After a quiet second quarter, the Vikings struck first with a 25-yard touchdown pass from Sam Darnold to Justin Jefferson. However, Detroit responded with a touchdown pass of their own from Goff to Khalif Raymond. It appeared as if the Vikings were well on their way to a fourth quarter comeback, knocking down a pair of field goals, along with returning a David Montgomery fumble for a 36-yard touchdown. After failing on the two-point conversion, Detroit marched down the field and Jake Bates iced the game with a 44-yard field goal, giving Detroit a 31-29 win. This gave the Vikings their first loss of the year, giving both teams a record of 5-1. This was a well-played game on both sides, and it'll be another matchup to keep an eye on when they face off later in the regular season. Tennessee Titans vs. Buffalo Bills. Heading into the matchup between the Tennessee Titans and Buffalo Bills, no one saw this being a good game. Buffalo was favored by 9.5 points, a ridiculous spread for an NFL game. However, the Titans came out surprisingly well out of the gates, scoring the first 10 points of the game on a field goal from Nick Folk and a 4-yard touchdown pass from Mason Rudolph to Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. However, this was a very short-lived high for Tennessee, and the Bills finally came to life on both sides of the ball. Following the 11-minute mark in the second quarter, they did allow a single point and absolutely torched the Titans' defense for 34 unanswered points. In the third quarter, Amari Cooper caught a 12-yard touchdown in his debut with the team. By the time the final whistle sounded, it played out how everyone expected. A big win for the Bills, taking the game 34-10. Buffalo now sits at 5-2, while the Titans are fighting for the top pick in the 2025 draft at 1-5. Miami Dolphins vs. Indianapolis Colts. Without Tua Tagovailoa under center following his concussion, the Miami Dolphins have looked like a completely different team. Things did not get better for them in their matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. In the first half, it looked like they were finally beginning to click with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. Huntley found Jonnu Smith for a 10-yard touchdown in the first quarter, and late in the second, they took a 10-0 lead on a field goal from Jason Sanders. However, despite getting the ball with only 22 seconds left in the first half, the Colts were able to drive down the field and Matt Gay nailed the 52-yard field goal as time expired. The rest of the game belonged to Indy, scoring 13 unanswered points on a 7-yard touchdown run by Tyler Goodson and a pair of field goals by Gay. The Colts took the game by a final score of 16-10. This was a rough game for both teams on the offensive side of the ball. Both sides combined for only 621 yards. The Colts improved to a record of 4-2, while the Dolphins now sit at 2-4. It'll be a very uphill battle for them to see the postseason, even if Tagovailoa is able to make a return in their next game. Seattle Seahawks vs. Atlanta Falcons. Moving on to a game that many thought was bound to be one to keep an eye on between the Seattle Seahawks and Atlanta Falcons. Seattle opened the game up hot, scoring 10 unanswered points on a field goal from Jason Myers and a 20-yard touchdown run from Kenneth Walker III. Bijan Robinson scored the first points of the game for Atlanta on a 5-yard touchdown. However, with just 4 seconds left in the first half, Geno Smith found DK Metcalf for a 31-yard touchdown. This was a very strong showing for Metcalf, but he was forced to leave the game early with a sprained MCL. Heading into half, Seattle held a commanding 17-7 lead. Atlanta came out of the locker room fighting back, with Kirk Cousins finding Drake London on a 5-yard score. However, this was all the Falcons had in them, and the Seahawks went on to score 17 unanswered points to close out the game on a 17-yard pass from Smith to Walker III, a fumble by Cousins returned for a 64-yard score, and a Myers field goal. Michael Penix made his NFL debut, completing his only pass for 14 yards. Seattle took the game in dominant fashion, winning by a final score of 34-14, proving they could be a dark horse team to make some noise in the postseason. Both teams enter Week 8 with a record of 4-3. Houston Texans vs. Green Bay Packers. Now let's jump to Lambeau Field, where the Green Bay Packers took on the Houston Texans. This was a highly touted matchup between two very promising talents at the quarterback position. However, only one of them showed up to play. This was a very back-and-forth battle from the start, with both sides unable to pull away. A field goal from Kamai Fairbairn gave Houston the first points of the game. However, Jordan Love led the Packers down the field and hit Tucker Kraft for a 14-yard touchdown. Just 2 minutes later, Joe Mixon found the end zone on a 2-yard run. Love then threw for another touchdown, hitting Dontavian Wicks for 30 yards. The Texans ended the first half on a 10-0 run off another field goal from Fairbairn and a 4-yard score from Mixon. Heading into the half, the Texans held a narrow 14-13 lead. The Packers struck first on the only score of the third quarter, an 8-yard pass from Love to Josh Jacobs, marking the first receiving touchdown of his career. The two teams swapped field goals in the fourth, and Green Bay came out on top 24-22. This was arguably the worst performance of CJ Stroud's career, struggling for only 86 yards through the air while completing just 10 of his 21 passing attempts. Despite this, both teams are still in good shape to make the playoffs, each sitting at 5-2. Cincinnati Bengals vs. Cleveland Browns. Now we'll jump to the Battle of Ohio between the Cleveland Browns and Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati couldn't have asked for a better start to the game, with Charlie Jones returning the opening kickoff for a 100-yard touchdown. Things got worse for the Browns before they got better, with Deshaun Watson suffering a torn Achilles late in the second quarter. After he was carted off, Nick Chubb found the end zone in his first game back in over a year. After missing the extra point, the Bengals entered halftime up 7-6. The offense finally started to click in the third quarter, with Burrow finding Jamar Chase for an 18-yard touchdown, then T. Higgins for a 25-yard score in the third. After Dorian Thompson-Robinson failed to impress, the Browns went with Jameis Winston in the fourth quarter, who found David Njoku on an 8-yard touchdown, then Cedric Tillman on the 2-point conversion. However, there was not enough time left for a comeback, and Cincinnati came out on top 21-14. The Bengals improved to a 3-4 record, while Cleveland now sits at a measly 1-6 with their quarterback sidelined for the remainder of the season. Philadelphia Eagles vs. New York Giants. Let's take a look at an NFC matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and New York Giants. This was Saquon Barkley's first game back at his old home stadium, and he made his presence felt early, scoring the first points of the game on a 3-yard run. With this score, he currently has more touchdowns in MetLife Stadium this season than Giants quarterback Daniel Jones. The Eagles followed this touchdown up with a 41-yard bomb from Jalen Hurts to A.J. Brown to push their lead to 14 points. The Giants were able to stop the bleeding and kick a field goal with 5 seconds left in the half. However, they could not stop the tush push, and the Eagles scored the final 14 points of the contest through this play. Philly took the game by a final score of 28-3, improving their record to 4-2, while the Giants sit at 2-5. Las Vegas Raiders vs. Los Angeles Rams. In our next game, we go from the East Coast to the West Coast, where the Las Vegas Raiders took on the Los Angeles Rams. Both offenses have struggled, with both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp being sidelined with injuries, while the Raiders took the field for the first time since trading away Davante Adams. The lack of depth at wide receiver showed on both sides. Kyren Williams scored 2 rushing touchdowns for the Rams, while a 33-yard fumble return from Cameron Curl were the only scores of the game for LA. On the flip side, Daniel Carson put on a masterclass for the Raiders, making 5 field goals. This constant trend of settling for field goals wound up killing the Raiders as they fell by a final score of 20-15. Los Angeles now sits at 2-4, while Las Vegas is 2-5. Carolina Panthers vs. Washington Commanders. The Washington Commanders have been one of the most surprising teams so far this season. Heading into the year, no one could have expected just how well the team would mesh together and how quickly Jaden Daniels would adjust to playing in the NFL. This was a blowout, with the Panthers only being able to manage 7 points to the Commanders' 40. Daniels was forced to leave the game early with a ribs injury, but Marcus Mariota did an incredible job filling in, throwing for 205 yards and 2 touchdowns. Washington now sits at 5-2, while the Panthers are 1-6. Kansas City Chiefs vs. San Francisco 49ers. Arguably the most hyped-up matchup coming into Week 7 was the game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. This is a rematch of last year's Super Bowl, and once again San Francisco failed to keep up with the Chiefs. This time it was Kareem Hunt who came up huge for Kansas City, rushing for 78 yards and a pair of touchdowns. On the flip side, Brock Purdy had an awful showing, throwing for 212 yards and 3 picks. This was another poor showing from Patrick Mahomes, who's having his worst season to date. He threw for 154 yards and 2 picks. However, in the end, the injuries that have piled up for the 49ers proved to be too much, now losing Brandon Ayuk for the rest of the season with a torn ACL and MCL. The Chiefs kept their dreams of a perfect season alive another week, winning by a final score of 28-18, while the 49ers are struggling to keep their heads above water with a record of 3-4. New York Jets vs. Pittsburgh Steelers. In the Sunday night matchup, we saw the New York Jets take on the Pittsburgh Steelers in what was supposed to be an electric reunion between Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. However, it quickly became clear that even with all of the accomplishments and the elite connection they had in the past, it may take some time before they're as locked in together as they were in Green Bay. On the flip side, this was Pittsburgh's first game with Russell Wilson at starting quarterback. In what was supposed to be an incredible duel between two veterans at the position, Wilson clearly came out on top, throwing for 264 yards and 2 touchdowns compared to Rodgers' 276 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 picks. This looks like an entirely different Steelers defense. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren combined for 146 yards on the ground. It's clear that Wilson's ability to make plays through the air has opened up the rushing lanes for the duo, and Pittsburgh could end up being a very scary team this year. They came out on top by a final score of 37-15. They now sit at 5-2 while the Jets are 2-5. It's clear that if things don't turn around quickly in New York, what very well may be a farewell tour for Rodgers could end on a very sour note. Monday Night Football: Baltimore Ravens vs. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Baltimore Ravens took on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the first of a doubleheader of Monday night games. This was an absolute shootout by two of the league's elite offenses. Not a whole lot of defense was played on either side, and it was a good night for anyone who bet the over. Mayfield had a roller coaster of a night, throwing for 370 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks. On the other side, Lamar Jackson put on an absolute masterclass, throwing for 281 yards and 5 touchdowns while picking up an additional 52 yards on the ground. Baltimore's rushing attack couldn't be stopped either, picking up 169 yards on the ground and scoring on a 13-yard reception. The Ravens came out on top by a final score of 41-31, but the Bucs lost much more than just the game. Mike Evans went down with a sideline injury, and Chris Godwin suffered a dislocated ankle that likely put an end to his season. While they're still 4-3, depending on how long both of these playmakers are out, it could mean the end of any chance they have of making any noise in the playoffs. However, for Baltimore, they look like one of, if not the most dangerous team in the entire league with a record of 5-2. Los Angeles Chargers vs. Arizona Cardinals. Rounding out Week 7 is a matchup between the Los Angeles Chargers and Arizona Cardinals. This was a defensive battle on both sides. While Justin Herbert threw for 341 yards, he failed to find the end zone even once through the air. LA as a team didn't score a touchdown and instead had to settle for 5 field goals. While Kyler Murray did not have a stellar game by any means, he did leave the game with a touchdown through the air and on the ground. When the final whistle sounded, Arizona took the game by a final score of 17-14. This is a game that came down to the wire. A huge unnecessary roughness penalty allowed James Conner to break a big run that gave Arizona the chance to kick a game-winning field goal. The Cardinals now have a record of 3-4, while the Chargers are 3-3. Thank you for tuning in to American Baller. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for future videos.